Battlefield 6 is just over 3 weeks away, and we keep having more things revealed officially. Next week, we'll see some details on campaign and perhaps multiplayer out of the Tokyo Game Showcase, but today we've got our first look at 2 maps coming at launch and a whole plethora of new weaponry, along with other stuff as well to look at that's not under NDA like the Labs builds. Today, we're taking a look at Mirak Valley, Operation Firestorm, the new mode Escalation, and a lot more in between. So drop your thoughts, drop a like, and make sure to subscribe to stay up to date with all things Battlefield 6 and other FPS content here on the channel. We've got a massively busy fall upcoming, so I'd love to have you in the community if you'd like to join. But for now, let's get into it. So let's start out with the maps. Let's start with Mirak Valley, the new map here, a large map featuring all types of different combat. For Conquest, if you're an infantry player, you're going to really like the combat between B and D, as those flags are the opposing buildings of the construction site. But if you don't hold those zones, they can be somewhat hard to break back into and retake if there's a group of enemies that are overwatching the entry points here for it. A, C, and E are all relatively spread out by comparison, where a vehicle may not be a bad idea to get from point A to, well, not B, but you get the point. It's a lot of open area, though it's nice because there is a lot of cover littering those areas, whether it be shrubbery, debris, and other things, but it can make navigating on foot possible without being immediately spotted and blown to bits by a tank or something. Conquest gameplay, I think, is going to really depend on the lobby that you end up getting. We had matches fill up with bots from time to time because it was a small capture session, and we had multiple matches running to keep everyone in the action at all times during that short window of play. But when you had bots that weren't necessarily pushing objectives with a clear objective in mind, you kind of got that spread out sort of flow of the match that slowed everything down. When you have clear pushes for objectives, it felt like you were always in the action. So if you have one of those matches where players will do the same and spread out on attacking zones with like 1 or 2 players at a time and having everyone else in no man's land in between, pacing may feel a bit different. But if you can get a match of all players playing the objective, you're not going to notice that, I think, at all. As for breakthrough, I actually really liked it on Mirak Valley, personally speaking. This segmenting the zones made for solid pushes with combinations of close quarters combat and a little bit of longer range fights depending on where you're at. The zones start out with the A side, hillside, and the trenches, which made for some really interesting sight lines, pushes, and the ability to even navigate around enemies at points while progressing further pushed you right into the heart of the construction sites, which also make for really great close quarters and tense combat. Also, if you can bring down the crane on that construction site, it makes for even more chaos in the middle of those 2 structures, offering up not just necessarily an open pathway between them, but giving you some cover and some interesting lanes to navigate as you go from one building to the other. As for Operation Firestorm, not entirely sure what I need to say. Firestorm probably speaks for itself for so many different players. Returning to this map was a lot of fun. It was awesome to return to the mashup of the open fields and the industrial design that's always felt like such a cool battleground to me, and so to come back was definitely nice. We played Conquest, Breakthrough, and Escalation on this, where as opposed to Mirak Valley having some interesting lulls perhaps, depending on the mode, I think that for the most part, everything flowed maybe how you remember it. You could probably say the same as for like Mirak Valley, where if you had matches with bots or slower playing players, it would be something that maybe has some of those lulls, but for the most part, whenever we were playing here, that didn't quite happen as much. I do think personally Breakthrough with that focused action was a bit more chaotic just because you're segmenting the map into smaller chunks, but that's to be expected. Escalation played pretty well on this, but we'll touch on that and what I mean in just a second as we break down the mode in its entirety, because this was the first time we got to play Escalation, and it was definitely a unique approach to the mode. As for vehicle play though, these maps, of course, they were the big 2 maps here. They were the largest of the maps we'll see at launch, it appears, with more likely coming in Season 1 or beyond, but without speaking to speculation or leaks, these were used to show off the scale of the map, and for the vehicle play, you're going to see a much better opportunity to play with everything else, along with Liberation Peak in the final full launch product. Now, these maps featured everything: your MTB, IFV, light transports, anti-air, attack helo, transport helo, attack jet, and fighter jet, all actually with the ability to customize the loadouts and what you have equipped on them as you end up spawning in with them, which is definitely cool to see that now and have the customization options there. During our play session, I spent some time in tanks. I spent a really little bit of time in the helicopter, but I also didn't get to spend any time in the jets. Those things were scooped up immediately when they'd have the option to spawn in, but having seen other players play with it, talking with them, and then having general B-roll provided by DICE showcasing the footage further, it looks like there's plenty of space in the airspace to have fun with all types of the different vehicles. So great to hear, all things considered, that these are the biggest maps we'll have on offer, built for specifically that type of play. That said, moving on a little further, let's talk about Escalation. This was, at the multiplayer reveal, described as a larger scale conquest of sorts, not necessarily in player count, but in flag count. But nothing was really ever revealed or showcased beyond that. I'm not quite sure it even made its way into labs now that I think about it, which is definitely interesting to consider, but this is something that I think will be a little bit more chaotic in some matches than others to play, but it starts out with 7 flags. A flag all the way down through G flag. Now, controlling at first 4 of those 7 flags will grant you score towards an overall point on the round. Seems time dependent, but whether or not you end up getting more time or sort of progress towards a score holding more flags, I'd imagine a pure domination of all 7 flags versus a 4-3 split would grant you more progress faster, but we didn't have a ton of time to test out the intricate details of that stuff. But your goal is to hold a majority of the flags to gain progress towards a point. Once a point is awarded, 1 flag comes off the board and forces combat inward a little bit. Eventually, you'll whittle down to at the least 3 flags to fight for that final point. This taking all of the combat and condensing it into a more middle point of the map, with HQs even coming closer to that to keep you in the action a bit more, as opposed to the edges of the map where they start out. But the first team to 3 wins, so you can win by taking all 3 flags initially off the board, or bringing it down to a close battle where it's 2-2, and you end up fighting over the final 3 remaining in total. All in all, it was a fun change of pace, kind of a collapsing zone type experience that, with all the news of Battle Royale, I can't help but see some parallels here for this, though that's probably not entirely by design, but it's a different take on Conquest. I think some people will love it. I think some people will kind of think it's cheesy and not necessarily care too much for it, maybe feel like it's a gimmick, but it was something that was fun to play in our play session with everyone trying to go for those objectives and being very objective heavy. But that said, that was the maps and the modes. One thing that also struck me out of this was a lot of the customization. We're not going to go into every single bit here. We'll probably save that for a video tomorrow or so, talking about everything in general that we had in terms of stuff outside of just the maps and the mode. But the weaponry was one of the big things that really stood out to me, because this build, I'm not entirely sure if this was the final number, but we had so much more weaponry to play around with this time than opposed to the beta, which is to be expected. Of course, we are right on the precipice of the launch of the game, but I'm just curious if this is the list of weapons that we'll have at launch. If anything is added, or more than likely not subtracted, but I'm curious if this is the final total. But in addition to the beta weaponry that we had, we saw more rifles of the SOR 5.56 Mark II, AK-4D, Cord 6P67, L85A3, and the TR7. Your carbines, you had the GRT BC, the QBZ 192, the M277, and the SG553R. Your SMGs, in addition to what you had in the beta, you had the PW5A3, UMG40, KV9, SCW10, USG90, and the SL9. You had additional LMGs of the DRS IAR, RPKM, M60, M240L, M250, and the M12-3K. Your DMRs, you had the LMR-27 and the SVDM, and snipers, you had the SV98 as well as PSR. Shotguns, you had the M1014 and the 18.5 KSK, and pistols, finally, you had additional pistols of the M45A1, ES5.7, and the M44. So if you're keeping track, that brings the total number of weapons, in addition to the beta, total up to 45 total weapons. We only had 15 in the beta to access. So this, I would not be surprised if it is the total that we see at launch, but we also saw a couple of weeks back, one of the recent labs builds ended up having 51 weapons, I think, was off the top of my head. I could be wrong on that, but we don't know if that accounts for all Season 1 weaponry coming, if that's something that maybe that's Season 1 and 2 weaponry. We don't know if they add 1 or 2 more weapons in at launch, but a healthy number of additional weapons, bringing up what we had in this playtest up to 45, and only having so much time, I attempted to play with a bunch of the new weapons, but didn't get around to everything clearly. We only had 3 hours of playtime and 6 to 10 matches total. Compounding on top of that, just a smaller thing to wrap up everything with is you had the manual inspect feature actually available, which is pretty cool. So for people like me, probably what you're going to see out of the thumbnail of this video, you can actually change the different angle of attack that you want for an inspect instead of it just being a singular tracked motion that is predetermined. You can end up changing what way you want to look at your weapon, which is pretty cool, I think. But anyways, that doesn't really have anything to do with gameplay. But that is what we end up seeing out of a sort of second multiplayer reveal here, and the content leading us into what we have for launch. Now, of course, we are still missing some stuff in the other maps out there. We don't know for sure anything about the total number of weapons, if that's all we have. We don't know anything about the customization, the skins and stuff officially. We don't know progression details. So, like, there's a lot of stuff still upcoming that in the next couple of weeks we'll have revealed to us. But for right now, that's everything that we got here out of this. Would love to know your thoughts down below. Drop your thoughts, drop a like if you guys enjoyed the video, and make sure you subscribe for more Battlefield 6 and other FPS content. I'd love to have in the community. For now, though, thanks so much for watching. Mine's an Espresso. I'll see you later. Take care, and peace.